next moderator is a person who has been heavily involved in life science for the past years and who's always been curious and passionate about entrepreneurship and innovation with a clear purpose. Please help me welcome our eminent moderator, Mia Ekdahl, General Partner at Björk Ventures.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Mia, and I am extremely glad to be here. It's the third year I'm given the privilege to moderate a panel on life science and technology. And this year, we have a quite interesting panel. So welcome up, all of you. I would say, if you haven't yet met Jonas Kjellstrand in the life science space, watch this, because Jonas, being an expert in AI and describing himself as being on a mission to drive innovation and sustainable growth in the tech sector, knows a thing or two also about what happens on the life science side. And then we have Mala Valroy, who I'm glad to say is nominated to Female Investor of the Year.
Wow.
Mala says that what drives her is having to meet companies that has the courage to ask the right questions rather than having all the answers, which I think is a good theme also of this panel today. Then we have Marcus Schindler. Marcus is Executive Vice President, Research and Early Development, and also Chief Scientific Officer at Novo Nordisk. And there are a lot of things to say about Marcus, but he's really someone who pioneers open innovation and breaking down silos. And I've heard others say that Marcus's leadership in science is curious, achieved with rigor. So let's challenge him on that. And then we also have Tej Panesar, who is a partner at Prism.
I wish. Breaking news.
That's your new role. You didn't know, but you've been hired. Prism Ventures, Prism Ventures, based out of London. And you have a really interesting career moving into science to be able to become a better investor, which I think is extremely intriguing, certainly in this area of tech changing the way we look upon life science. So with that, give them a warm hand of applause and let's kick off this session. So the theme of this one is shaping the future of health, emerging technologies paving the way. And we could probably spend the rest of the day on this topic. So I'd like to start with the question of AI, because it's on everybody's lips, right? So is it really the knight in shining armor for changing the world in life science? So last week at World Economic Forum, the CEO of Google DeepMind, Demis Hassabis, who's also a Nobel laureate, he said that he expects that research of drugs designed using AI will begin this year. So starting with you, Marcus. Is that true at Novo Nordisk?
Absolutely, but maybe if we take one step back, if I look into R&D as a whole in pharmaceuticals, we are one giant prediction engine. Right? I mean, we build hypotheses and then we predict outcomes, molecules or new targets. And these predictions take us from not so certain to more certain. Right? And we do that by experimentation. That's how nature reveals itself. And that can be in animals, in test tubes, or in silico. Yeah, and I think that is certainly what we're seeing, that the in silico part takes a more driving role, and that the so-called wet lab experimentation maybe becomes more confirmatory rather than exploratory. So absolutely, we are seeing molecules. We have molecules that are designed in silico. Actually, what the real interesting thing is, rather than just taking maybe a few steps outside of our comfort zone, we're seeing entirely new chemical spaces unfolding to targets that we've known, but we didn't expect that those chemistries would work. So I think that is the real exciting part, at least to start with.
Mm-hmm. Anyone wants to pick up on that one? Yeah. Mala.
I think I take umbrage to the fact that we describe it as a knight in shining armor, which implies that life science is a damsel in distress, and neither of those are true. it pits, and I think it creates a false dichotomy between the value or the innovative potential of wet labs versus AI, and there's no versus in this conversation. I appreciate what you're saying regarding wet labs being confirmatory, but I think from our vantage point, looking at very early stage startups that are developing new methods and new tools, it's very synergistic. It's a harmony of the wet lab opening up new information for the software, the AI, or the tools to then train and optimize. I think we know so little about how this intricate web of proteins and molecules and DNA interacts. It's new all the time. Sometimes we know how much of something we express, but we don't know where or why it happens. So we're unraveling disease mechanisms and targets, and I think we will see a leapfrog thanks to AI and these other technologies. But I don't think there is a competition, as we sometimes get packaged in here.
Jonas, would you? Oh, sorry. Tesh.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think those with long scientific memories in the room are entirely aware that bioinformatics, machine learning, AI have been used within the life sciences space for decades, in effect. The reason they particularly come to the fore is an explosion in data, particularly genomic data. And so that's why it's incredibly relevant and important and playing a bigger role. But fundamentally, deep learning technologies have been in the space within structural molecular biology for a very, very long time. It's great to see this, that effectively any modern biotech you see having a dry lab and a wet lab alongside each other are table stakes. It's just standard. I don't think we have to talk about necessarily AI first companies versus traditional biotech companies. That's a false dichotomy. But I think the thing that is really important that we have to think about is how we build it right within the life sciences sphere, because, and I think this is a theme we'll come back to, for me, the biggest rate limiting factor in the deployment of deep learning technologies within biology is data. In theory, it has vast potential quantities of data that can be generated from the field, but actually those data pools are developing within pockets, within individual biotech companies. And I think that's a huge factor in terms of unlocking the potential in the space.
Jonas, will we get rid of the wet labs or?
So let me first put some perspective on this, because every about 50 to 75 years, we get an opportunity, and has done that for the past 300 years. We get an opportunity where our technology innovations, and by no means are they new, cross over into other fields of technology or biochemistry or anything else. When those cross points happen, things get partially out of control, and that's what we're seeing with artificial intelligence at the moment. And it's going to get even more fun, believe me. So what happens then is that you have no control over the release technology, which is the very engines of artificial intelligence. And you got to look at it this way. We've gotten an opportunity in the world to turn energy into intelligence, and that has never happened before. With that, you're going to see the explosion of certain areas, good and bad, particularly around hard and complex issues where we need to compute a lot of data at the same time that we're doing other types of research. So the whole area, medtech in particular, comes into a flux where you're going to solve issues that you have not solved before in a very rapid way. And our systems in the medtech area, particularly around medicine and treatments, have a slowness to them, FDA approvals and so forth. Those are actually going to get speeded up. So you're going to see treatment for the most common disease on the planet, which is high blood pressure. You're going to see treatments for that in completely new ways that are non-medicated, but they're driven by artificial intelligence and behavior. So that shifts out from medical fields and medical companies that are going to start to play in the field of a new endeavor for them, which is technology. I'm really proud to be sitting next to Novo Nordisk because they really understood this. That is the reason they are investing in the second largest AI compute cluster in the Nordics. We have invested in the largest. But what that actually tells you is that the people at Novo Nordisk, which is a biomedical company, starts to understand that we need to understand information technology. And just imagine when those things cross over into obesity behavior, which is now medicated with a certain type of semaglutide, is going to go and become artificially intelligence induced in my behavior, non-medical. So somebody at Novo Nordisk has understood that that's the case. And be lucky, because all of you in this room are probably going to get added, unless you get a terminal disease, you're going to get added in your lifespan roughly 5 to 10 years more of your life. So congratulations. That is the result of what's going on.
Mala, is this what you're investing in?
No. And I think there's a place for each of us in the value chain. I think the word intelligence is doing a lot of heavy lifting in the word artificial intelligence today, because in life science, as we've talked about now, you're as good as your data, and you can't extrapolate from data that you don't have. So for us, it's incredibly important, before we think of this as a done and dusted, we have no solutions that we should be backing that are solving the diseases. I think for us, it's much more looking at early stage research-based companies that are coming out to better unpack the mechanisms behind it synergistically with AI, as you're saying. So again, it is not either or in our books. But I don't think, I used to be in the lab, and I called my mom, sad PhD student, trying to get some comfort from her mom, saying, I've been doing this experiment, the cells aren't growing, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And in all her wisdom and tongue-in-cheek, she said, any parent will tell you experiments with life never go as planned. But it's true. And that's the thing. AI is great when you give it parameters, you give it wheels, and then it can extrapolate and it can give us compute and give us insights. I'm not contradicting that, but we are good as our starting point, and we know very little. We know a protein might do something in a disease. We don't know what ripple effects it sets in motion. So again, when we're designing these drugs, this is why the clinical study process is so long. What I think we will see is shorter times to market for a lot of these drugs, perhaps. Far more accurate targets, less side effects. Those things I absolutely go into. But that's the realm for the big companies. And I think for our VCs, we're there trying to understand what are the enablers.
It's to build on this, and I totally agree, actually. There is a synergy between wet and in silico, right? Without it, I think it makes no sense whatsoever. What we're seeing, I think, is a shift in how we're actually spreading our investment, in terms of data generation or data analytics, more towards analytics, but also actually to generation of the right data. Because for a period of time, we wrongly believed that all data we could get our hands on would be useful. They're clearly not. Yeah, and I think we learned it really the hard way. So we actually took a step back to say, well, and how much should we actually invest into generating high quality data at scale to be the basis and I would say sort of the learning cycle for the foundational models that we're building. Yeah, and that is actually a really interesting but also very difficult discussion to have also with my CFO, because he will ask me, and when will I get a return of this? And I say, well, I don't quite know yet, because I don't know how the model is going to behave. Yeah, and then you start actually to fantasizing about returns. Maybe that sounds familiar to you, right? And not that you are, but it's that's a very difficult field when you're exploring this, right? So there will be those setbacks and learnings on, how large does your data set actually have to be, and how unstructured can your data be, and that from biological data is hard to grasp sometimes.
So, but you would actually benefit in your industry from taking you off the stock exchange, because that's what's breathing down your neck. So if you look at other private investors, and we have private investors in our portfolio, and their horizon is 50 years. And there's a shitload of other things you can do when your vision is 50 years than if your vision is 3 months.
Well, the cool news with Novo in this case is that we're actually owned by a foundation. So
Yes.
we are formally listed, but
Yeah.
only one quarter is voting. But still, I mean, we actually utilize this, and I think it's actually an interesting aspect on how you show up. So 3/4 of us are owned by the foundation, 1/4 is freely available. That actually gives an interesting dynamic of long-term,
Gives
sort
you
of,
a little bit more time.
but it also gives you pressure from the outside,
Yes.
because otherwise you might run the risk that you fall in love with your own stuff and just go do it. So I
It's
think
not a risk, that's a guarantee.
yeah, exactly. So there's a corrective here, which I think is fine. Yeah.
And coming back to the data, is that we are now seeing, so every single automotive autonomous vehicle is to a large extent trained on synthetic data, data made up. So do not underestimate the entrance of synthetic data. Now, it doesn't happen that fast in Sweden particularly, and the other Nordic countries, because we are exemplary good at collecting data, clean data on our citizens and on our behaviors, which other countries are not. And that is a super untapped resource we have in Sweden. Imagine if you can take all the hospital data, which is clearly you can structure, and you start to run sophisticated analytics on that. You're going to get much, much faster into providing healthcare and health systems that are much cheaper than what we have today.
I mean, it's amazing if you have LPs in a VC that has that longevity and can wait. But Tej, can I ask you, what is the role otherwise that the VC can play, or VCs could play in investing in these new technologies together with corporates and having that stamina?
Yeah. So I think the scientific process, the traditional scientific process, is not quick. The development of drugs, the development of taking them through regulatory hurdles is not quick. Decade plus long, 500 to $1 billion per asset to get approvals. And so I think where VC comes in, they can provide a sense of timing, capital, urgency, deadlines, how to structure teams, how to actually get something across the line within defined periods. And to an extent, with some of the groundbreaking firms within AI, within the space, groups like DeepMind, groups like Zera in the US and others, VC has played an incredibly important role in that regard. However, as is often the case in the life sciences industry, you need the strategic players to also be on the cap table. You need deep pockets to be able to follow on and potentially be the acquirer and the buyer of those technologies. So there is this inherent synergistic sort of closed loop that you need within life sciences that's, again, it's a well-trodden path across traditional biotechs, and it's now coming into the AI sphere.
And Novo clearly has deep pockets. What can you do here?
Well, we're also being invested in by people out there. So we're also working with other people's money. So it's no different. Of course, we are a commercial entity. We work on large diseases, which also, on a good day gives large returns, but it's also large investments. So I think, yes, we're doing well, and there's a really unique setup, which I think really helps us to inherently do a job that is longer term. But maybe on this topic, I would also caution that we're not confusing speed with rush. And I worry sometimes when I see a lot of biotechs coming our way to show, look what I've got. And 9 out of 10, I would say, I wish you'd come to me earlier, so we could co-create, because you were rushing towards a perceived value point or exit. Yeah. But have neglected to collect a few important pieces along the way, which unfortunately we now have to go back and redo, which then is a challenging discussion, because then also your upfront actually goes to a fraction of what any biotech was expecting, and that I think we're not in a good place together. There's two separate movements ongoing, I feel.
Hala, how can a VC handle this? Because this is not the first time we're hearing this, that the large corporates thinks that the startups have run too fast. On the other hand, the VCs want proof. So how can you help?
First, I think we shouldn't discuss VC as sort of a monolith. I think there's different nuances here, even in this field. I think those that especially deal with early stage, more scientific companies, there might be a tendency to build in isolation, as you were indicating, but also have the most potential, perhaps, to collaborate. And I think this is where, when you invest, if you can see their plans and the iterative approach of it, and it's something even during the investment phase that you can soundboard and open up for, and then later on, if you come in as an active investor, guide them towards such collaborations. It's important.
Yesterday, during the investment day, I think in your panel, Tesh, someone said, at what point can we hear regulatory authorities say, skip phase 1, phase 2, and go straight into phase 3? Anyone who wants to pick up on that one?
We're on our way there. I don't think you can skip. And again, I feel like we like to have these very hyperbolic, now we're just going to rip this one off and put in a new status quo. It's not that, it's evolving. You can look at the FDA Modernization Act 2.0. They're introducing the study of organoids coupled with AIs in order to take the burden off of animal studies. First of all, they don't work. If you want to train an AI model, study why we can't translate successfully from animals to humans, and basically you have to now train your AI not to do everything that worked in the mouse models. But clearly, we need human-relevant data. We need it in biosystems, and this synergistic approach of saying organoids and AI, we will allow those to replace animal studies. It's in the regulatory pathway. Does it completely rip off clinical trials? Not yet. Can it? Maybe. Maybe we see something hybrid. But I do, again, come back to the fact it will not be as it was before. It will not take the time as it will take before. And I think we'll gain deeper understandings why a drug works the first time, let's say for a cancer, but not when it recurs. And I think those are the clinical insights that we will gain that we've never had before.
I would probably reframe the question, and I would rather have a first time in human, a phase 1b, so understanding actually and also confirming hypotheses we have built in humans, right, and make this data rich. I would actually skip the phase 3 if I could have a choice. First of all, it's massive cost, it's long timelines, and in many cases, not in all, but in many cases, it is still confirmatory. Right? There's something that we should have found out in a phase 2. Yes, there are always some surprises. So what if we could take that into real world, have a conditional approval, and let's just think of COVID, what happened there. Right? I mean, we were zooming through because we had the structure of the virus, there was a technology or technologies that could solve it, and then everybody had a sense of urgency to actually say, well, maybe we know enough, but not moving actually will penalize us significantly, and a little bit of this attitude. We shouldn't go into panic mode. That we know enough to actually move this forward and give this at scale gradually to people, that could lead us to skipping phase 3.
So we need more crises because we seem to be not wasting them, which was a good example of that.
Yeah, good
How
point.
do we fix that?
From my perspective, it's interesting. I mean, having sat as an LP in multiple tech and life sciences funds and seen both sides of that table, I mean, life sciences is very often viewed from the outside as a binary asset class, and that's prevented actually quite a lot of venture dollars and LP dollars move into the space that actually could have done very well, because the regulatory process, while incredibly tough, does produce an inherent structure around the investing process. And you get VCs that will come in early, and their job is to identify first-in-class, best-in-class science with a high propensity to then be picked up by pharma, potentially acquired or invested by later stage investors. And so, you know, I think there has been quite a significant level of adaptation by the FDA and others, you know, accelerated approvals processes for rare diseases. So I think more of that, absolutely, but there's no need to tear anything up.
So if you track all the artificial intelligence or generative AI and large language models, deep minds of the world, if you look at who has invested in those, it's roughly 13 people in the US that owns that space. And they have enough money to continue, not mixing in pension funds or anything else. And they're dead serious to doing that. That's why you're going to see artificial intelligence running so much quicker than we thought, and that we have underestimated. That's a separate discussion. If you take a look at those people and you start to look at them, you realize that half of them are now in Donald Trump's ministers. So you got to take the consequences of that and understand what that means. And if you look at the whole cohort and what they invest second most in out of artificial intelligence, it's in the healthcare system and healthcare space. So they have roughly as much money into the healthcare space in all ways, shapes, and forms as they have into the artificial intelligence. Same story. They can keep at it for a long time.
So we have just a few minutes here, so I'm going to leave you with a question that I hope you can also continue to discuss. For a startup in this space who wants to utilize the technologies that are emerging, at what point does the innovation happen, and where does the IP sit, and how can you do a proper valuation if there is a lot of AI-driven or other tech-driven innovation happening prior to the startup presenting?
No, those are SaaS metrics that don't belong in a deep tech conversation, to be honest. I think we need to look at it not through where the IP is today, but rather a moat and what we can create down the line. And sometimes it's a blend of those things. Whether there's a regulatory advantage to be had, whether there is a proprietary component, which often comes from the wet lab piece of it, and the really disruptive potential. I think, yes, we're seeing doubling down of AI, but it's biospecific. You have to understand how life science and LLMs for life science work in order to be relevant for the Novo Nordisk down the line. So that collectively we can invest in, that will have a valuation. We might not be crystal balling the correct dollar amount, but that's immaterial. As long as it's unique, defensible, and incredibly scalable, it's a VC story.
Thank you, Mala. Now, to just wrap this up, and I hope you continue to talk to these people outside, biology will continue to humble us, I hear, is a clear message, but don't underestimate the potential that new technologies has in accelerating the development of new treatments and the way we do healthcare. Would that be a fair summary?
Very fair.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, panel. Thank you, audience.
Thank you.